Hey everyone, welcome to another Reasons and Resources, and in this video we're looking at Swift. So moving on through a number of languages now, we're quite deep in this series. So let's talk about obviously some reasons why I might wanted to have learned Swift, and to try and tempt you to maybe learn Swift. And then we'll look at some resources. Normally spend a lot more time looking at resources than we talk about reasons, because I'm hoping that the resources themselves might draw you in, I suppose. So if you're not familiar with Swift, it's a high-level general purpose language, multi-paradigm compiled programming language. It's created around 2010, but it didn't really sort of properly appear until 2014. It uses an LLVM based compiler, and if you look at sort of where it came from, its origins, you can see it's been influenced by a number of languages, but the impression I get is this came about as a natural progression for Microsoft wanting to move away from Objective-C and maybe develop a language that just worked better for their needs for iOS development. But if you're curious, you can obviously read more, because I will include in the description all the links above, as I always do. So you can sort of read the origin story in more detail than I can express it within the confines of this particular video. Now, as you'll notice with a lot of languages where their origins are contemporaneous and a good degree of the development is running in parallel, you get this sort of cross-influencing where, there might be a language that predates the development of another language that's influenced by that language, but then in turn the newer language influence the older language. So you can see something like Rust here, that's a good example. I'm also noticing recently, I haven't paid a lot of attention to VLang, and I should do, because I'm seeing references to languages that influence it coming up a lot more. And certainly when I've done a recent review of the influence by and influenced for mainly the sort of 13 languages that are featured in the book that I've been working through and I've mentioned before, which is Programming Language Explorations, I see this crop up a lot where languages have influenced the VLang. So I need to take a look at it at some point. I don't think it's covered in the book actually, but I'll find out as I'm working through some of the smaller chapters. So with that in mind, the fact you have a language that is very much developed for a particular operating system, it's no surprise to find that you're going to have a language that is designed specifically for performance on the platform that it's developed for. So it's highly efficient, optimized for Apple's hardware. And of course, in combination with that, you're going to have all various safety features there, because no one likes a programming language that they've developed for a particular hardware to crash their own hardware. It doesn't look good. The other thing you'll notice with it is, syntax wise, once you start to sort of go through the history and look at the evolution, you might well notice, it's a C style language. So if you're used to seeing that particular code structure, then it obviously makes learning it easy to read, easy to understand. One point actually I'd like to make, I don't know if I've mentioned this at all before, and that's the thing with like switch and case statements. I found it's useful to just be mindful when you're switching languages, excuse the pun, so when you're moving from one language to another, just check out you understand exactly in that language how switch or case statements work, because often you may find that they might behave slightly different, or they've got additional functionality that maybe you weren't aware of in the other language. And then often you might find there's particular in languages where there's pattern matching, there's sort of alternative to switch statements which look like a switch statement but don't have switch anywhere in them, or case, and maybe have guards and are using other conditional statements in collaboration with those particular statements. So yeah, just be mindful of the switch style statement. I suppose that applies to any conditional statements generally, is often the structures and their behaviour can vary, sometimes quite subtly, between languages. So again, interesting to see in a language, how does it lay out a function? How is it defined? Is it declared before it's defined? Is it declared, defined at the same point? How is it used? Can the functions be passed? Those sort of things. And so, one of the reasons why I started doing the Programming Polyglot website was I was interested in, if you stick to the same features in languages, how does that manifest itself across multiple languages? So if you're talking about functions and closures, like how do they work, behave, what do they look like in, say, C versus what do they look like in Lisp, and so on. So, yeah. Interoperability might be another reason. That's a lovely word that's coming up a lot now. So this ability for a language to work seamlessly with pre-existing libraries, frameworks in other languages. And another reason why you might get into the language is the community side of things. And so we'll look at what sort of community resources are out there as well. And you can go through, like I said, I always like to check out this the comparison with other languages. I think it's always useful. Looking at idioms I find super useful as well. Now, I suppose I really haven't addressed the reason why I might want to learn it. Well, really it's just for curiosity. I don't really have any formal desire to develop for iOS. Like I don't have an app that I'm absolutely chomping at the bit to get out there, or I'm not doing any work for anybody where it might require an app being developed. But app development is something I haven't really touched on that much. Anything that I've developed specifically for mobile formats is probably when I dabbled in WAP back in the day. So you could get websites to render on pre-smartphone browsers. If anybody knows anything about that, they know what I'm talking about. So that was my excursion, really, is taking existing stuff that had been coded in HTML and CSS and whatever, and then creating like a WAP version of that as well. So at some point, beyond me just going through and learning the rudiments enough to do the entry on my Programming Polyglot WordPress site, I need to definitely dig deeper. So my impetus for learning it is again as a way of me understanding similarities and differences between programming languages, because that's what I like to look at. That's currently my big sort of number one project. Development and other implementations. So there's a point here that because Swift can run on Linux, it is sometimes used as a server-side language. So yeah, I'm not sure how deep the rabbit hole goes on that myself, but yeah, it'd be interesting to check out. And also, like various implementations of languages. It's always interesting to see for a given language, you might have a particular implementation, but then, any other alternate implementations of the language on other platforms or just on the same platform. Looking at the popularity of the language generally, so we will start off, or I always like to go through the last Stack Overflow survey. And so if we look at the one that answers, or is one of the questions, or one of the graphs that explores this particular question. So which programming, scripting and markup language have you done extensive development work in over the past year, and which do you want to work in over the last year? So where do we see Swift on the list here? So about midway, just above midway probably. So we're underneath assembly and Ruby, and just above our Visual Basic, MATLAB, VBA, Groovy, Scala, there's Perl. In terms of this interesting graph, so the admired and desired, you can see another one with quite a wide difference between the value here, which is the desired value of 6.5%, and the admired of 63.3%. And it's about a third of the way down the list in total. And then finally, we have this one, the top paying technologies. So where are we here? Let's just see. So we're here. Okay, so just underneath MicroPython and OCaml, and not surprisingly right next door, or unsurprisingly, right next door to Objective-C. And then we've got things like Crystal, PowerShell, Lua is here, and Fortran. So yeah, there'll be a reasons and resources episode on Fortran at some point. On this COBOL. I don't see Algo anywhere. So yeah. So let's move on to the sort of main content, I suppose, the sort of, the main repository for Swift. So like several big name languages, or almost all big name languages, apart from the really old ones, there's a major website which you can go to, and you can sort of lose yourself in that site. So we have the SwiftSet website here, and we can drill down through that. Obviously our first point of call is probably to just dive in and get installing it. So yeah, there's instructions here on how to install Swift, set up the tool chain, those sort of things, and the various ways you can do that. And then we've got documentation bit, so once you've installed it, going through and checking out the documentation. There is a REPL, which is always interesting when you're learning, so you can just sort of dabble around without getting seriously committed at first, just to learn the syntax and the basic structure of the language. Although, like I said, it is very C-like, so yeah. I suppose there would be a tendency to just dive in and start creating, source code files and stuff like that. Package ecosystem, obviously information about that, pretty important. Avoid you reinventing the wheel. Then obviously there's some useful stuff in here for interacting with certain, or APIs for interacting with certain services. We've got a community section with all the sort of key important people here. So you can see it's pretty well structured here, because we're talking something that's specifically grown out of Apple. And then we have a blog as well, All, you know, and all these within that website, which is super useful. Then we have the developer section for Swift on the apple.com website. There you go. And you've got various information about playgrounds and REPLs. It's nice to have a sandpit. What I often do is, in addition to any playgrounds and REPLs, first time I normally code, I just create what I call a sandpit file and start messing around in that. So I get a feeling for like compiling the language and stuff like that, but without having to constantly sort of create new files or new projects. So yeah, that's how I often do it. So that's my next point of call after I've played around with the playground, tried out the REPL. I normally create something like named sandbox dot on whatever the extension is for the language and start playing around with ideas in there. Some more doc stuff here about the language, so I'll include a link to that. Loops back to the website. Then we've got the Swift Programming Language book, 5.7 edition on Apple Books. There, if you'd like to go down that route. And then a number of interesting YouTube resources that I just point towards, and then you can go out from there, because like anything, as you use these, look at them, YouTube's going to suggest other things to look at and you'll discover your own stuff. But there's a few here I thought I'd just flag up. So we've got Swift Conf. So I always like sort of checking out the conference channels for programming languages. That's always quite a good start. Then we've got Fireside Chat with Chris Latner, creator of LLVM, Swift and Mojo. WDC 24, a nice like a quick, a quick 27-minute tour of Swift. And then podcast wise, so we have this. I mean, there's quite a number of podcasts, but I just want to flag up a couple. Now, of course, be careful. This is an older podcast, but I thought it was quite good because it's got a number of things about like the evolution of Swift. So that always really, I love those sort of origin stories. I'm a bit of a sucker for those. And then we have this one, Swift Over Coffee. So this one is keeping up to date, but the other one you can see, I think I'm right here, yeah. So there's nothing on this particular one after 2022. Then we've got Swift is on Exorcism, if you're a big Exorcism fan. So you've got the concepts, you can go in like with all the other programming languages on here, see if there's a learning exercise in there, you know, work your way through it, do the, you know, the code challenge, whatever you want to call it. So actually go into the learning exercise. You look at the community solutions if you're a bit stuck, those sort of things. So I find this a really useful resource myself. And I quite like the idea that often the problems you're solving, like layers of lasagna, for example, is a common problem across all the languages on here. So you can see how it manifests itself in different languages, which I really enjoy, like seeing the commonalities and the differences. And, you know, shameless plug, on my website, which I'm using, is basically it's an excuse to dabble in lots of different languages. Not that I need an excuse. So I'm sort of working ahead of the curve here. So every week I work on a new section on here. If you want to know more about the project, it's in the About section. So it's a sort of fully transparent about what I'm trying to achieve here, what resources I'm using. So I'm not doing anything sort of, there's no smoke and mirrors going on. You know exactly what's going on here. Suffice to say, you know, if you've looked at the About section yet, large language models are involved, and that will be constantly expanding. So I'm really interested in how to leverage those as mainly a training tool myself, to help me sort of have something to sort of interact with and bounce ideas off, and you know, leveraging the various LLMs out there for sort of code correction and just kicking the tires, I suppose. So you can see here's Swift here. So if we go in usual stuff I look at. So a little bit about Swift, a bit about binding and scope. The sections are always the same, but obviously what's in them is going to change based on how that manifests in the language. So here I've got functions in Swift. Sometimes I do like this, like I might give an abstract example. If that's the way the sort of LLM answer has sort of pushed me. But most of the time you'll get examples of code that I've tested, either on a local version of the language where I've actually installed it, or if I don't really want to have anguish installing the tool chain on my machine, because you can see with the amount of languages I'm going to get through in the course of a year. I mean, I've got episodes of this right through till 2026, just the sheer amount of languages. So I don't really want to be installing all of them on my machine. I mean, I could install them, uninstall them, but quite a lot of time I leverage, various online sandboxes that are out there to try out these code snippets, make sure that they do work as they are supposed to. So yeah, so a lot of different things here. We look at extensions, what that means in the language, dispatch, because sometimes in different languages the term, it might be used slightly differently, or because of the limitations of the language, there may be some things that you can or can't do. When we start to get down there talking about, say, how garbage collection manifests itself in a language. So bits about control flow, usual thing here. What we've got, pattern matching, how that might be achieved in the language. And normally it's just one good example, but sometimes I get multiple things if I just want to go into that area of regex, if that's implemented in the language, as well as any pattern matching that might be there. A bit about type systems and type inference, immutability, and so on. Structures, that sort of thing. So there we have it. So hopefully you've enjoyed that quick look through reasons, resources for checking out Swift. It might inspire you to check it out, it might not. I'll leave it up to you, and I will, as I've said, include links to all of these resources in the description section of this video. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future video.